So we want to be very clear that we understand the difference between what a necessary condition is and what a sufficient condition is. So let's take a look at some of the statements you might see or hear around an airport. The first one is, boarding pass holders only pass this point. So what does this mean, right? This means that if you want to go past this point, you must have a boarding pass. So it is necessary for you to have a boarding pass to go past this point. However, this doesn't mean that it's sufficient that you have a boarding pass, because even if you have a boarding pass, you might be carrying something that you're not allowed into the airport. You might not have the required identification, right? So just because you have a boarding pass doesn't mean that you can go past this point. All this is a necessary condition. So you must have a boarding pass to go past this point, but there are other requirements that aren't captured in this boarding pass requirement, right? So you want to be very careful that if you see something like this and the question says, if you have a boarding pass, does that mean you can go past this point? No, not necessarily, but you know that if you don't have a boarding pass, you can't go past this point. So what you see is the group of people that can go past this point is smaller than the group of people that have boarding passes. But you want to make sure that you understand that there are some people out here that have a boarding pass but still can't go past this point. What about the next question? Every passenger is given a free drink. Okay, so this means that if you're a passenger, you are given a free drink. But you want to be careful because this doesn't mean that if you're not a passenger, you don't get a free drink, right? You might be the pilot, you might still get a free drink even though you're not a passenger, right? Or you might be somebody working on the airplane before it takes off, you still might get a free drink even though you're not a passenger. This just means that if you are a passenger, you're guaranteed to get a free drink. It doesn't mean that if you're not a passenger, you won't. So of all the people that get free drinks, the passengers are some of them. But there are some people that are not passengers that still get free drinks. The next one, no liquids over 100 milliliters allowed. Okay, so we know that if the liquid is over 100 milliliters, it's not allowed. But that doesn't mean that if the liquid is under 100 milliliters, it is allowed, right? Even if the liquid is under 100 milliliters, it could be some type of contraband that you're not allowed to take onto the plane, and it still wouldn't be allowed. All this is saying that if it's over 100 milliliters, it's guaranteed to not be allowed. So the group of things over 100 milliliters is separate to the group of things that are allowed. But there still might be things that are over here that are less than 100 milliliters or equal to 100 milliliters that are still not allowed. The next one, tray tables must be stowed if you are not in first class. So if you're not in first class, you must stow your tray tables. But be careful, this doesn't mean that if you are in first class, you must not stow your tray table, right? This just means that if you are not in first class, you must. So this is just saying that if you're not in first class, your tray tables are stowed. There could still be some people here that are in first class that stow their tray tables, right? The next one, if you are with children, you may board early. So this is saying that if you are with children, you're guaranteed to be able to board early. But this doesn't mean that if you aren't with children, you can't board early. What if you have a first class ticket or you have mileage or priority status? You could still board early even if you don't have children. This is just saying that of the group of people that can board early, everyone with children is in that group, right? But there's some people that are outside of that group of people with children that can still board early. The next one, to use Wi-Fi, you must purchase a pass. Okay, so you can't use Wi-Fi without purchasing a pass, right? This is saying that it is necessary for you to have purchased a pass to be able to use Wi-Fi. But be careful because this doesn't mean that if you have purchased a pass, you can use Wi-Fi. For example, you might be someone that has purchased a pass, but you don't have a computer or phone with you. So even if you purchased a pass, you wouldn't be able to use the Wi-Fi. Of the group of people that have purchased a pass, the people that can use Wi-Fi is a subset of that group, right? So there are people that have purchased a pass that can't use Wi-Fi, right? But everyone that's using Wi-Fi has purchased a pass. Okay, so let's look at a couple of statements and see how they're logically flawed. So the first one, only writers are authors, and only authors win the Booker Prize for fiction. Therefore, only those who win the Booker Prize for fiction are writers. Okay, so I think just intuitively we can see that this is logically wrong, but we want to figure out why that is, right? So let's think about our kind of diagrams that we drew before. So only writers are authors. That means of the group of writers, every author is part of that group. Okay, and then this is saying only authors win the Booker Prize for fiction. So of the group of authors, those who win the Booker Prize for fiction are part of that group, right? So when we combine these, we see that this is a nested kind of three-group thing, where this is writers, authors, and finally Booker Prize winners. But this is saying, therefore, only those who win the Booker Prize for fiction are writers. But we know that that isn't the case, right? Outside of the people that win the Booker Prize, there's all these people outside of here that are still writers, but they just haven't won a Booker Prize yet, or they won't ever win a Booker Prize, right? So this statement is flawed because it is confusing what is necessary to win the Booker Prize for what is sufficient to win the Booker Prize, right? It is necessary for you to be a writer to win the Booker Prize for fiction, but it is not sufficient that you're a writer to win the Booker Prize for fiction. Now we look at the second question and we see that it's following the exact same format, but it might be a little more difficult for you to wrap your head around. It's a little bit less of an intuitive answer that you can get to, so you really want to make sure that you're following the same logical process that you followed for the previous statement, right? So this is saying only writers understand the rules and syntax of languages. So the group of writers, those who understand, and only those who understand the rules of syntax of languages can appreciate the beauty of modern literature. So those who understand, appreciate. Okay, we combine those statements, we get to the same kind of three nested circles that we did before. This is saying only those who appreciate the beauty of modern literature are writers. But we know that's not true because of the group of writers, there's all these people outside here that don't appreciate the beauty of modern literature, but that doesn't mean they're not writers, right? They might appreciate historic literature, right? Just because they're a writer doesn't mean they have to appreciate the beauty of modern literature. It's just that those who appreciate the beauty of modern literature are always going to be writers. Okay, let's look at this question now. So Joseph is saying, only when it's cold outside does the classroom heater turn on, and the heater is currently off. Therefore, it must not be cold outside. Okay, so we follow the kind of reasoning that we did before. Only when it's cold outside does the classroom heater turn on. So it is necessary for it to be cold outside for the classroom heater to turn on. But this doesn't say that it is sufficient that when it's cold outside, the classroom heater will turn on, right? So, if we think about this in our diagram, we have, the times when it's cold outside. And we know that the classroom heater only turns on when it's cold outside. But that doesn't mean that every time it's cold outside, the classroom heater is going to turn on, right? So, it might be cold outside, but the electricity is off, so the heater is turned off. So just because the heater is currently off doesn't mean Joseph can say that it must not be cold outside. It might still be cold outside, right? So, for this question, we can immediately see that C is the right answer because Joseph has ignored the possibility that the heater may be turned off even when it's cold outside. Okay, so the next question. Most hunters carry knives. No animal rights activists are hunters, and only hunters have an Alberta hunting license. Therefore, Jim is not a hunter. Let's look at the first statement. Most hunters carry knives. Hunters, most of them carry knives. So a big portion of those hunters carry knives, right? The second statement, no animal rights activists are hunters. We have animal rights activists and we have hunters, and we know that they're separate, right? There's no overlap between those two groups. And finally, only hunters have an Alberta hunting license. So everyone that has an Alberta hunting license is a hunter. Okay, so the question is, which of the following, if true, most strengthens Sam's argument? A, Jim does not carry a knife. But Jim could be somewhere over here, right? He could be someone who doesn't carry a knife but still is a hunter. That doesn't strengthen Sam's argument that Jim is not a hunter all that much. So that's potentially a weak answer. B, Jim strongly supports animal rights. So we want to be careful. Strongly supporting animal rights, we don't know what that means in this context, right? So even if he supports animal rights, he might not be an animal rights activist. And that's the only thing this question asks us about. We don't know the relationship between animal rights and animal rights activists. So this is, again, a pretty weak answer because it doesn't really have any direct relation to the question. C, Jim does not have an Alberta hunting license. Well, Jim could be somewhere over here, right? Jim could be a hunter but still not have an Alberta hunting license, right? He might live somewhere else. He might live in Australia. He could still be a hunter even though, he's never been to Alberta and doesn't have an Alberta hunting license. So C is pretty weak. It doesn't really say that much about Sam's argument. D, Jim is an animal rights activist. Yeah, right. So if Jim is an animal rights activist, he's inside this circle. He definitely cannot be a hunter, right? This is definitive proof that he's not a hunter because we see that no animal rights activists are hunters, right? So, immediately I'm drawn to this answer because this directly kind of proves Sam's argument without any flaws. E, Jim doesn't like to hunt. We don't know what liking to hunt has to do with hunting, right? Jim's job might be to be a hunter and he doesn't like his job, but he still has to do it to, feed his family, right? So just because he doesn't like to hunt doesn't really offer too much in terms of proof that he's not a hunter. So D is the right answer. Okay, and this last question, it's a little tricky, so we want to be really careful about the necessary and sufficient conditions. To be eligible for the Young Leaders Prize, one must be under the age of 21 and attending a post-secondary institution. Furthermore, it is a requirement that a candidate must not have a criminal record, nor a grade point average below 3.5. After an initial review, only those who demonstrate their community leadership and aptitude for problem solving will be invited to interview for the prize. Everyone who interviews for the prize will advance to the shortlist, exclusively from which the 3 candidates who are deemed to be most deserving are given the prize. Which of the following must be true of a recipient of the Young Leaders Prize? Okay, so let's go through these questions one by one. It's a must be true question, so we want to see something that not only could be true, but absolutely must be true. A, the recipient has a grade point average above 3.5. Okay, let's go back to the question. It is a requirement that a candidate must not have a criminal record, nor a grade point average below 3.5. Okay, so the candidate can't have an average below 3.5, but that doesn't mean that they have to have an average above 3.5, right? They might have an average of exactly 3.5, which means they're eligible for the prize, but they don't have an average above 3.5. So this is the wrong answer. B, the recipient has demonstrated their community leadership and aptitude for problem solving. Let's be really careful about the requirements, right? So only those who demonstrate their community leadership and aptitude for problem solving will be invited to interview for the prize. You must have demonstrated the community leadership and aptitude for problem solving to be invited to interview, right? And then everyone who interviews for the prize will advance to the shortlist, right? So all of these people will be in the shortlist. Okay, but we want to be really careful because there could be some people that are over here that get added to the shortlist perhaps through, another process. Maybe they don't have to interview, but they, simply write an essay and they could still get the prize, right? This statement doesn't say that, you have to interview to get the prize. This doesn't say that you have to demonstrate your community engagement to get the prize, right? So there are people outside of this group that have neither demonstrated their community engagement nor interviewed that still are eligible to get the prize, right? It is sufficient, right? It is sufficient that if you demonstrate your community leadership and aptitude and you interview, you're part of this little circle, you're still part of the entire group of shortlisted people and you can still get the prize, right? But that doesn't mean that if you haven't done those things, you can't get the prize or you can't be shortlisted, right? So we want to be really, really careful that we don't confuse ourselves and say that you need to demonstrate your community leadership, right? So this is a wrong answer. And exactly for the same reason, this is the wrong answer, right? C is the wrong answer because there are people out here that have neither demonstrated their community involvement nor interviewed that are still, part of the shortlist and therefore could still be recipients of the prize. D, the recipient was deemed to be the one most deserving of the prize. Well, there are a couple of issues here. The first one, the most obvious one, is the one, right? This is saying 3 candidates are going to win the prize. So you could have been the second or third most deserving person and still get the prize. You don't have to be the one most deserving. But there's also another issue here, which is that it's not just the most deserving person that gets the prize, right? It's the most deserving person from the shortlist, right? You might be the most deserving person on earth, but you never even heard about this prize, or you never applied, or you applied and for some reason you never made it to the shortlist. You still might not have gotten the prize, even if you're the most deserving, right? So for those 2 reasons, this is wrong. And finally, E, the recipient advanced to the shortlist. Yes, this is a necessary condition, right? You must advance to the shortlist to get the prize because exclusively from the shortlist are the 3 candidates selected, right? So only from the shortlist are the 3 candidates selected. You must be on the shortlist to get the prize, and so E is the right answer.